So it's not for kids.
You're telling me about Genius Lyrics?
Yeah, have you ever been on the website Genius Lyrics?
Yeah.
My hot take was that if you're a Genius Lyrics user, do not comment on what you think the lyrics could mean unless the artist has said something and you're commenting like what the artist has claimed it was about. Because I really don't care for like some random a person's opinion on what they think Neutral Milk Hotel was getting at. But if like, I don't know the singer's name, do you?
Zonde?
Yeah, if Zonde himself has said in a statement that this is what it was about, that I'm like somewhat interested in, like actual trivia related to the song. Now I want to know. But if you're just like out here like, well, the artist could be referring to the fact that they, took a shit one evening. It's like, you don't know that? Like,
I'm with you.
Yeah, like, I don't care about your opinion on this.
I know you said you don't care about the opinion, but do you think Chocolate Rain is about racism in America or diarrhea?
It's explicitly about racism in America.
Because if you read the YouTube comments, it's like 50-50.
It's like transparently about racism. I don't know why like Chocolate Rain is like the metaphor he went with. Because it almost like kills the song and you like listen to the song and it's got like that goofy like doo 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 like backing track that came
goofy, more like awesome.
Well, it's like both a little bit, but it's like a very serious song that is like designed not to be taken seriously.
Do you think that whether you think Chocolate Rain is about diarrhea reflects on your political views? Like that is the ultimate litmus test for whether you lean left or right?
Oh, almost for sure. I cannot imagine like anyone saying that it's about diarrhea unironically, like having any political consciousness at all.
What does it mean then if I'm like, I can see both sides? Does that mean I'm a gross moderate?
It's funny because like I'm not sure, if that means you're like the most based person alive or if you're like a fence sitter. I'm not
because I wouldn't consider myself a fence sitter.
Neither would I.
If we're using this litmus test, then I would be.
How about this, right? Your political spectrum can be defined by the Zonde song Chocolate Rain. And if you think it's about diarrhea, you're far right. If you think it's about racism, you are liberal. If you think it could be about either one, you're a fence sitter, centrist. But if you are woke, you believe it's about both simultaneously, that it's a superposition of diarrhea and racism in America.
The Zonde horseshoe theory.
Yeah. This is like the worst content we've probably ever produced.
I disagree. This is probably the best thing we've ever done.
Oh, okay. I'm just mostly shaking my head about how much I've said diarrhea in the opening like minute of our episode here.
No, they're going to be studying this in like future social media affecting political theory class.
Well, it'll be in like the future where they don't even have college anymore. It's just re-education centers. And for whatever reason, like they listen to this podcast to... I'm just kidding. I can't go that far.
If this is the podcast they pick, we're doomed for sure. Welcome to Shelf Stable, a podcast celebrating board games that have stood the test of time. I'm your host, Kenny Katayama.
And I'm your other host, Tom Bowers. Today, our featured topic is the benefits of a gamer lifestyle. What can you apply to your real life if you play tabletop games? Anything? Is it worthless? Was it all pointless? But before we get into all that, let's just talk about some of the crap we've been playing recently.
I got a Project Mom update, Tom.
Oh boy, this is the reason I tune in every week.
We'll keep them short.
I'm not even kidding. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Project Mom.
Oh, well, shoot. I got to keep them going then.
Yeah.
I got to play Sushi Go a couple of times with my mom. I picked Sushi Go for our drafting game because I felt like Seven Wonders might be a little too complicated. And I definitely wasn't going to sit down and do a Magic draft.
Hell no.
And I actually got to play with my dad too. So here are the thoughts on Sushi Go. She went, I think it's pretty and cute. It could play well with a family, and you could play it with people of varying ages. And then she went, but I do think this game is boring and not as interesting as the other ones that you ran by me.
Okay. Wow. Your mom is already... I see where you get it from, I guess.
Yeah, she didn't dislike it, but she felt like it was kind of a non-game.
It's interesting because I recently played Sushi Go again myself, not even that long ago, because it was incidentally in some of the board game cabinets at the library. I was on a team, let's say, with the 4-year-old and then against the 10-year-old, and it was just like a 2-player draft. It was a fun activity for kids because like the 4-year-old gets to pick all the sushis that she thinks are the cutest. Mm-hmm. You know, in that context, I feel like it shines. But in a like gaming for gamers' sake context, it is kind of lackluster at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's a baby game is my point.
It's a baby game. So I asked her to like elaborate on why she felt it was a little lackluster. Mm-hmm. And she said that just overall, it felt like there wasn't too much going on. If I'm trying to interpret what she's saying, mm-hmm. She didn't feel like the decision space was interesting, which I don't blame her. Like, I don't feel like there's a very interesting decision space in Sushi Go. And yeah. It's weird because like, yeah, it distills and makes it easy to understand drafting, but at the same time, it doesn't really make drafting exciting. I mean, some would argue that Seven Wonders doesn't make drafting exciting either, but like, it's almost like it feels a little too obvious what to do sometimes, even if it isn't necessarily the right decision. Like you just like convince yourself like, oh, okay, well, this is the thing I'm going to do. This isn't like, oh, I'm agonizing between two things. Again, I'm kind of like projecting my interpretation onto what my mom said. We'd have to ask her further, but that was her take on Sushi Go. My dad had one contribution as well. Mm-hmm. He said that the theme really didn't make any sense.
Oh, really?
Which I don't blame him. Like, why is the miso soup 3 points, but only if nobody else takes it? Like, mechanically, that's interesting because it's like a prisoner's dilemma. But like, sure. It's not like you're at a sushi restaurant and you order a miso soup and you're like, But then like, if you order a miso soup and the other person you're with orders a miso soup, you're like, this is awkward. Well, I don't even want to drink my miso soup anymore because you got one too, you know?
It's just the world's cattiest sushi group. It's like they can't wear the same outfit. Maybe that's the theme, and maybe that got lost somewhere in the revisions. Phil Walker Harding was writing the rules. He was picturing that everyone would have the mindset of being one of the mean girls. And it would be like, okay, like when you take the miso soup, you know, that makes you the leader and no one else can. I don't know. I've got nothing.
Sushi Go mid. We did beginner setup and then we did a 2-player focus setup for the second one because my dad dropped out.
He was like, I'm going to go get some sushi for real, and like left.
We did actually go get sushi afterwards.
See, that's the real, I think, value factor is that it is a huge marketing boon for sushi.
It's just a game pushed by Big Sushi.
Big Sushi. I will say sushi for millennials, it's like kind of a thing. Did you guys watch The Office while you were playing too? Like, you know what I mean? It's just like pure pandering to the millennial demographic.
On the future printings of Sushi Go Party, they're going to put on the back of the box, it's just a game pushed by Big Sushi for millennials. Quote, shelf stable.
Yeah, it's like right there on the box.
Great advertising.
Speaking of like re-theming it, I mean, like the whole idea is that it's like a rotary sushi place, but I'm like, well, you know, right now it's extremely pushed for millennial demographics. But when Gen Z is going to have to be the people with buying power, like they got to reskin it, you know? So get ready for Skibbity Go in a few years.
Skibbity Go. Coming to your stores.
It's all about like drafting enough toilets to overwhelm the other thing.
Oh, I'm so excited for Skibbity Go.
I welcome it. Okay.
Enough about my mom. We played Samurai from 1998. This is a Reiner Knizia game. Have you heard of him?
No.
Published by Fantasy Flight. Samurai is considered part of the Tile Laying trilogy. This is an unofficial trilogy by nerds that includes Tigris and Euphrates, Through the Desert, and Samurai. We've covered the other two. It's time to cover the final one. The first and foremost thing I will say is I don't think these feel like a trilogy. They're all very different. And interestingly enough, I think there are other tile laying games that Knizia has that share the same DNA, specifically with Through the Desert, almost to a point where that should be its own like trilogy or quadrilogy, as opposed to these three. I guess these three, because they are distinct and also they're considered some of his best tile laying games. But that's what I'll say before we even go into Samurai, is like, I didn't feel like these were a trilogy now that we've completed it. I felt more so that case for the Auction trilogy of his. But that's neither here nor there. Samurai, you got a map of Japan. You're putting down pieces. There are these hexagon pieces. And when you surround an entire symbol, you score that particular symbol. And the way you score that is you add up the numbers of each player, and whoever has the biggest number gets control of it and takes it. So that's the first part. It's like this tile placement area control where you're trying to put the highest amount of number surrounding things. But the things are scattered across Japan, and so placing a hex with a certain number might affect like two of those things at the same time. And that's where there's like some cuteness and some interesting stuff that you can do. And some of the tiles that you can place have special powers too, and those powers are interesting while still being simple as well. The second gimmick of Samurai is its scoring. So at the end of the game, the winner is the person who has the most of like two of the three things. And if everybody's tied, because it's like a 3-player game, the winner is the person that has the most of the second highest thing. And so, like, you and I had an interesting, because we played this a few times. You and I had like an interesting experience where one of our games, we were playing 3-player and 2 people tied on like every front. But then I, who was doing the worst of the 3, didn't win in anything, but I just happened to have the most of the 3rd place thing. And so I won. And we all looked at each other like, what?
We were like, hold on. Yeah.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on Samurai?
This game was awesome. I was talking about how I think I'd be really excited to, if I were like more into wood carving or something, like fashion a really sexy looking mahogany table or something like that had the map of Japan that this game has, and then carved all the pieces out of wood and like had nice soft velvet bags to pull them out of, and just like went ham making like a table for this to like elevate the experience, because it has a almost chess-like or more go-like, as I often like to say, I feel like, experience. And it's a really satisfying like tug of war in general. You know, you can see someone put a tile down somewhere and you go, you know, and you're like, okay, that whole region is scuffed. But now if I've put my attention in this other region, I could really like mess things up. And then there's that little bit of randomness where you have like tiles drawn out of the bag and they're behind your screen. You know, they don't necessarily know what you could be plotting, but there's some tiles that create some really elegant surprises, can really swing things. It feels cool. Really embodies like that Sun Tzu. It's like the art of war. I feel like it embodies that mindset, even though I guess it's a different culture, admittedly.
No, yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah, it's like it's almost an exercise in the philosophy of tactical war.
Because you're incentivized really to allow your opponent to invest at least a little bit in claiming one of these totems from one of these regions. And as soon as they've invested, now you can invest like less total tiles in order to claim the space, but you have to like get those numbers right, you know?
Yeah.
So it's this really cool dynamic where you're like just trying to capitalize on things that your opponents have only barely set the seeds in. But, you know, as soon as you make a move, they're going to have the opportunity to like make a counter move. And there's a lot to think about because it's like if you see that they've put their 3 of wheat out on the field already, you know that tile's not in their hand at the moment. And oh man, I don't know. I really like this one. I like to play it a lot.
Yeah, Knizia games, like he does a really good job of making your opponents look like they're geniuses. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you feel like a genius too. Oh my goodness, this person just really screwed me over royally. How did they even think to do that? Like sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's because the game just kind of opens itself up to interesting plays and back and forths. I would say more so than some of the other ones. Like Samurai really leans into this. I just kept feeling like people were outsmarting each other from turn to turn, and that's exciting. It's really exciting to play a game where the stakes just keep getting raised. You're almost like you're like watching a movie that is going off the rails and more escalating or something. So, you know, I'm sure there are people who are going to get hyped by this and then play it and be like, this is so boring. I want to clarify, like, the things that these two old men get excited about are not the things that you might get excited by. But at least for us two, we were losing it. You know, we were like, oh my God, this is so cool. This is such a cool game. So
sorry, nerds. There's no miniatures. There's no variable player powers. There's no iconic Marvel superheroes depicted on the cards. None of that's going on. It's like a boring ass chess-like.
It's like very dry.
Yeah, but it's light, it's simple, and it's fucking elegant. It's so elegant. It's so one of Knizia's best, I think.
Yeah. Very, very hyped on this one. Glad we got to play it. I was a little scared. There's a lot of expectation there, and I feel like lately I've been burned with those expectations. And so I was like, please let this be good. It really delivered. I would say it even exceeded expectations.
Even just between the first game we played of it and the second game, like the texture changed dramatically. Because like the first, there's this setup process where you draw your initial tiles and then everyone gets to like place the figurines that you're going to be fighting over in these different spots. The first time we did it, we were just like, oh, whatever. Like we did it at random, put them wherever. And it was like the second time, it was like, just we instantly could tell that each of us was thinking something very different. We were like, nah, you know, fuck Kenny. He's going for wheat. I'm sending this to Hokkaido. He'll never like, you know, waste that much resources getting that one, you know, and stuff like that.
That was Samurai from 1998.
All right, Kenny, you and I actually have played Deus from 2014. Deus?
Deus? Deus?
Deus?
Deus? Deus? Deus?
Is it Deus or Deus?
I think it's Deus.
Deus nuts. I don't know. This is designed by Sebastien Dujardin and published by Pearl Games. We both, I believe, really like this game. It's like a civilization game functionally. And it is a game where you are stacking cards in columns. I guess every card has its own color. The 5 colors each do a different thing. Not only do they do different things, they put different buildings on the board. And so you're constantly balancing the cards in your hand. You can either change what's happening on the shared map, or you can invest somewhat in a column that maybe doesn't affect the map very heavily, but is going to pay off later when you play another card and it triggers these cascading effects.
Yeah, you didn't even focus on the gimmick.
Yeah, the thing that makes this game different from other like just standard tableau builders like Terraforming Mars or what have you is when you play a card, that entire column sort of activates again. So all the cards that you've played previously in the order that you played them previously re-trigger. So whatever they did when you built them. I guess the other interesting decision point is that you don't have all of your buildings right at the start. In order to get a third building in that color, you actually have to discard cards from your hand with at least one of those cards being that matching color. And then you get some sort of like effect, I guess, as a reward. And it's multiplied by the number of cards you threw away. So you're constantly balancing like all those different things with the cards in your hand. You're like, okay, if I discard all the cards right here, which ones can I afford to give up on? Because some of the cards have effects that I might really want to get into play. And then at the same time, there's the spatial element of the map. And I found myself a little bit frustrated by this in our most recent game, where it was like people can just sort of creep up on you rather quickly, and then you're starting to get crowded out. And you're like, oh, fuck, I need to expand before I can even, play any of these cards because I don't have a valid region to enter into for this color of card. And I don't want to give up just lots of like really cool decision making. And it's just a very satisfying game loop of basically getting these sort of cascading triggers to go off.
Yeah, the cascading triggers feel really good because your power just ramps significantly. And I do appreciate that it has a cap. Like once you played 5 cards, basically you can't do it anymore because otherwise it would start to break. But when you play that 5th card, it just feels like you are a god, basically.
Yeah.
I was always kind of like dreading the moment when you would play military cards in that second game that we played because your military triggers just got nuts. That's kind of the engine that you built.
I thought I was in a good place with it. It really didn't end up paying out, sadly. I think you ended up winning. But there was a point where I felt really good about like every turn that I could activate my military, I was like stealing points from the other 2 players and getting a ton of gold from it and stuff. It felt like I had amassed, a sizable army and was like bullying everyone on the board.
I think the only thing is you didn't build a single temple. Even if you're getting all your points from other sources, you want to deny at least one temple.
There was definitely an aspect of that, and I think it could have been mitigated if I'd found more boats that were better. I really had multiple opportunities to build temples, but I'm pretty confident that I played boats that scored me as many points as the temples would have, if not more. And I think I just maybe got a little unlucky on the draw. And that's the one thing that I think this game maybe suffers from. There's a lot you can do to mitigate card draw, but you can also get like kind of stuck.
I don't know if it's because we're still learning the game, but multiple times we got in spots during the 2 games we played where it's like, oh, I guess I'm just kind of like crawling back in because I expended all my resources or something like that. I also really enjoyed this game. I mean, I think you made a comment where it's like it fits a lot of the shelf-stable isms.
Yeah, it's lightning fast to set up. It's very easy to teach. One thing I was going to say actually about the setup is that once you've learned the setup, it's a very like intuitive setup. Like sort of all the numbers are just kind of baked into the game. There's a lot of games where like the setup requires you to look at like spreadsheets and tables. I think Power Grid famously is kind of notorious for this. Deus does not have that problem, which I like.
It goes at a breezy pace. Like it's not necessarily a short game, but like it comes back to your turn really quickly.
Oh yeah.
And then it has depth too. It feels like your decisions matter.
There's a lot of weight. Big mistakes can be made.
I do have one criticism. Yeah. And maybe it's unfounded because we'll have to play it more.
Okay.
By the end of the second play, I did feel like I was starting to see some of the same things happening. And while I do think there's a few interesting strategies and directions you can go in, I'm afraid, I guess I'm skeptical that the game potentially is not as replayable as I hope for it to be. We'll have to wait and find out.
Yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from. And there's nothing really that alters the play styles. I actually have another complaint. You know where I'm going with this. The visual design leaves a lot to be desired. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So this game, it was funny because someone asked, like, when was this made? In my mind, I was like, well, it has to be before 2016 because for whatever reason, I feel like when 2016 rolled around, I'm not sure what changed in the industry, but people suddenly seemed like they were on their A game, relatively speaking. And in general, games largely have like a lot of resources to support good visual design principles. So this game came out in 2014, and I felt like I could smell that because there are just some weird choices that are just mildly frustrating. For example, the resources in this game are all just wooden discs, green, gray, yellow, and red for wood. The discs are brown, but the resource icon is green.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense because wood is both brown and green in real life. So you can like just barely put it together. You know, it's not like a complete struggle, but it's like one of those things that is just like a clear miss in our opinion.
They made swamp red in this game.
Yes, that's another thing that is mildly irritating. And you might think, what's the problem there? Well, there's barbarian camps that are very swamp colored. They look like swamps. Yeah, if you were to guess, if I held up the board, I was like, which one do you think is the swamp? You'd probably point at the one that is actually a barbarian camp. Another thing that I found annoying was there were some cards that have the same exact name and they do different things. You could gain 5 coins for 3 buildings in one region. There's like another card that'll be like gain 10 coins for 5 buildings in one region, right? So it just scales up. And both cards are called like Marketplace or something like that.
Could have been like
Marketplace and like, you know, Trading Hub or something like that. Like, no, they just had the exact same name and the exact same art.
Yeah, I don't mind the art because, you know, art is expensive, but at least change the name.
One of the first times where we're saying a shelf stable needs a 2nd edition Kickstarter ASAP.
I totally agree, though. I think it's a game that could really, really benefit from a glow up. It speaks to the fact that the game is so good that we're still playing it despite that, but also like it wouldn't hurt for it to be updated. Sebastien Dujardin, he actually announced recently that he's starting his own company. So they're going to be reprinting some of his games, including hopefully Deus. They haven't announced Deus, but
yeah, fingers crossed for that one. I look forward to that. So that's Deus from 2014.
Tom, I got to play Las Vegas Royale from 2019. This is a re-implementation of Las Vegas, which is actually from 2012. This was designed by Rüdiger Dorn, published by Alea. In traditional Alea fashion, it looks like this game was cut out of pieces of cardboard. Minimal effort was put into making it look presentable. But you know what? Tom and I really enjoyed it. There's something so fun about this game, and it might just be that you're gambling. In Las Vegas fashion, you're playing a bunch of mini games that involve you gambling, but while you're playing those mini games, you get to place your dice that you rolled in one of the 6 areas associated with that particular mini game. And at the end of the round, whoever has the most dice in that particular area gets to take the cake, gets the money associated with that mini game. Games range from like a push your luck thing to affecting some of the other games around the table to having a side pot. Like really it runs the gamut. And from round to round, you're going to have different games set up. This game is a hoot. I really didn't think much of it. I thought we were going to have a very bare bones, straightforward push your luck. But really it feels like 18 or so push your lucks baked into one slightly larger game, because it didn't even take that much time. Like you could play this as a filler when everybody knows what's going on. Yeah,
and you could simplify it further too if you wanted.
Exactly. You could
really
simplify it. But it still felt meaty. It felt like it had a lot of depth to it. I really had a good time. I'm really glad that you pushed me to play this, Tom, because I wasn't opposed to it, but I was just like, yeah, I'll play it. It's fine. But it wasn't like it wasn't one that I knew anything about. I will say that you looked like a total chode the whole time we played it, because for some reason you decided to put your Ray-Bans on. Be like, yeah, we're at the poker we're at the poker table.
They're not that fancy. They're just like the cheap ass sunglasses that my brother paid for his like bachelor party. It was like,
well, yeah, we're like in the gaming con, and he has his shades on while he's explaining the rules. And I just like couldn't take him seriously. It did kind of evoke the theme a little bit. He's the high roller, he's gonna take all our chips, but.
I had to be the guy that like no one could read, that was definitely part of the plan.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely enhanced it, and I'm talking about it. So I guess your plan came to fruition, but I was like rolling my eyes at you. Las Vegas Royale, it was a hoot. What were your thoughts?
Oh yeah, this was pretty fun. I mean, it was like maybe a little underwhelming, but it was like definitely it's like so light that it's just like it is. a great encapsulation of the experience of going to Las Vegas, except nobody has to actually lose any money. And it's a little better than going to Vegas, because like in Vegas, you just be sitting around the same person on a slot machine and being like, woo, or not. In this, there's a more competitive, I guess, like gambling feeling where you're like, some people are rooting for someone to usurp someone else. And so you get like the woo, like people at your table. Yeah. But you're constantly like in a push and pull against the other players. So there's always someone like on your side or not. And it's definitely just kind of like random and silly.
Push your luck gambling game with a little bit of area control. And so if that's your jam, check this out. It's Las Vegas Royale.
All right, Kenny. Well, at SaltCon, we played Power Grid, the card game from 2016. It's designed by Friedemann Friese and published by Rio Grande Games. It's a card game adaptation of another game by Friedemann Friese, Power Grid, which you may have heard of if you're listening to a show like this.
Tom, where'd the board go?
Where'd the board go? It's all cards. Always has been. I didn't really know exactly what to expect from this. I like Power Grid, so I just was curious what the card game was like. And then reading the rule book, it said, if you like Power Grid, this is pretty much the exact same game, except with just cards. Yeah, literally, if you've played Power Grid, you've probably played Power Grid, the card game. Players auction for power plants, and then they spend money on the resources that those power plants need to function, and then they generate electricity with their power plants, which earns them some amount of money. And you basically repeat that loop over and over. The thing that makes it somewhat interesting is that the player who generated the most money, it gets to go first, which most of the time is actually kind of a bad thing, because it means that you're auctioning first and you could end up sort of stuck with a power plant that you don't really want because no one else is going to bid it out from under you. So there's a lot of like decision making at basically every stage based on your position in the player turn order. And you're constantly sort of balancing the costs of running your plants with the profits that you're going to generate. And you're always trying to look for opportunities to generate more money. But at the same time, you're wondering, how much can I invest in a new plant while still being able to keep everything online? I don't know for sure, but I almost think I like Power Grid, the card game, slightly more than the original board game.
That's exactly my take as well.
Okay,
down to the I don't know for sure.
Perfect. Power Grid just ends up feeling longer. It feels more math and taxes-y, because you're constantly having to do literal math to figure out how to place these networks on a map of Germany. And there's definitely some interesting interplay to be had, but it almost bogs the game down in a way where Power Grid, the card game, sort of lightens up. And it just ends up being faster and more straightforward, and turns flow very quickly. No one has to get out a calculator because the numbers aren't so crazy. Yeah, it's just like nice, clean auction game with these cool decision points where you're kind of trying to keep your player position in a little bit of flux so you can benefit the most from the cheapness of resources when it matters, but then you have to balance that with being able to actually generate a ton of money at some point, right? Because without any money, you can't actually win any auctions, right?
I very much enjoy this. I don't know why, but the whole time we played it, I felt like I had a really good grasp of it. And normally when we play games, I'm kind of like, I don't get half of what's going on, but I'm enjoying it and I'm enjoying learning to understand it. It was kind of both interesting and cool that for once I was like, I can see the matrix. You know, I didn't even end up winning, but it just felt like I had a good grasp of the functions and how everything was working out. To echo what you said, I really enjoyed it. I'm not quite sure, but I feel like I might enjoy it more than any other, like the card game, the dice game adaptation of an existing board game. I feel like this one really, really does a good job of evoking the original game. Yes, it's its own game. It's not just a straight copy paste, but it feels like you're playing Power Grid. It feels like you're Spider-Man.
If you are a Power Grid fan, you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice by not checking this one out. Power Grid, the card game. It's from 2016.
100 games to play before you die.
Okay, Kenny, that's time for this part of the episode, the part of the episode where I talk about the 100 games that you need to play before you turn 100 years old and die. And this week's game is number 27 on your list. It's Ticket to Ride from 2004, designed by Alan R. Moon and published by Days of Wonder. Kenny, why is Ticket to Ride a game you famously hate on this list? I'm just kidding. You don't.
You're gonna say that every week,
every time for like all the middleweight gateway games section.
I'm surprised you didn't kill anybody in this week's announcement. Do you want to nominate? Rest in peace.
Rest in peace, Elon Musk.
Okay, all right.
Likes, charge, reposts, cast.
Ticket to Ride. Let's see if I can do the Ticket to Ride take in less time than you introduce it.
Okay.
Because we're short on time and everybody already knows about this game.
And this isn't adding anything to the time at all.
No, starting now. Route building, set collection, evergreen, Ticket to Ride. Y'all know why it's on the list. The end.
No said, I guess.
I mean, do we need to talk about Ticket to Ride? Everybody, do yourself a service. Go play Ticket to Ride if you haven't.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even if you're like, oh, this wasn't that cool, I don't understand. You know, like you'll have played Ticket to Ride, and it's really important to the hobby. It's like a headpiece. It's a headstone, whatever the term is. I don't know.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like probably the number one most like high ranked game in Gateway Games lists. Like, yeah, it's like the most gateway game of all gateway games in a sense, and it deserves its spot for that. Yeah, and I mean, Alan R. Moon spent multiple years like refining the game that would become Ticket to Ride, and you can kind of see that if you look at the history of Spiel des Jahres and Alan Moon. It was like a long road to get to this point, and so he kind of deserves the success because he really like refined and iterated on this design many times before landing on this.
Yes, Ticket to Ride.
All right, Kenny. Well, finally, enough of that bullshit. Holy fuck, it's already been like an hour of recording. What the hell have we been yapping about? We got to get to the meat and potatoes of this podcast before you have to go back to work or whatever. Like, holy shit. And the real meat and potatoes is the part of the episode that everybody is tuning in for. The thing that they care the most about hearing us yap about is the main topic of this week, and that's the benefits of a gamer lifestyle. What do we mean by that? Well, what, if anything, can we gain from playing board games? What real world applications does playing games have?
Well, we can all agree that board gaming is the thing that makes you the coolest of all the hobbies.
Yes.
Board gamers notoriously the hottest of the cliques. So yeah, if you're a teenager listening and you're like, why doesn't my crush love me? Your love interest will just instantly smell the pheromones on you from all the cardboard. What am I saying?
What are you
Tom?
saying?
Yeah. All right. Do you
okay,
want to contribute
no. I
to
think
this?
let me help you out here. So basically, the first thing that playing board games can give you is that new cardboard smell. And as it apparently turns out for Kenny, this has psychosexual attributes. It will make
so you're just riffing on my thing. I thought you were going to actually say something.
No, I was just helping you, like actually put it into words.
Okay.
Yeah, because you were like really floundering there. No, the actual like rewards of tabletop gaming, it's interesting because like I'm not sure that I've ever actually, in spite all of these years, ran across a scenario where I explicitly realized that I learned something from a game. Yeah. As in like I was at work and it was like, here's a problem. And then I was like, wait, this algorithm is exactly the same as terraforming Mars.
I have at least twice.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
but I don't remember them. but there
Kenny,
were...
do your homework next time.
No, but like I was trying to, for this topic, to remember what those situations were. But there was like a interesting like, oh, like this happens this way and I can apply it in my work or my life. Like, I just don't remember. This is not good podcast material. I'm saying there was something. I don't remember what it was, but there was something.
So the point is, like, you did have a moment where you were like, wow, this is the same like algorithm, the same heuristic as ethnos or something. And you're like, I can apply this to my job.
Yeah. I will say it doesn't happen very often, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, a track record of 0 and 2 for people who have been playing games for over 20 years. That's like...
I mean, I think it's maybe more subtle though than that. It's like not usually going to be an epiphany. It's like if you're playing games, you can gamify aspects of your work or your life in ways that may not be entirely conscious. Like you might not fully realize that you're applying like the same types of heuristics. Yeah. There's probably some argument to be made for that, but I don't know how much, it really comes across.
Okay. I mean, like cards on the table, we can both agree board games don't make you better at math. Because I know there's people who are like, oh, like I can calculate more since I played board games. Like, let's be real. Board games make you dumb.
Someone has made that claim?
No, I'm just imagining like this hypothetical human that would be like, this is one of the benefits. Board games make you dumber at math. You develop these heuristics and you make these assumptions and you stop actually like calculating things.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah, I can see that. One thing you can get from games maybe is like you could learn more about a topic. You could get better at geography, for example. I've played Brass Lancashire so many times that I now know the names of a bunch of cities in Lancashire County in the United Kingdom. So it's like, that's not nothing. If you met someone who is from Lancashire, it's like, now you have like just the most, middling amount of knowledge about where they're from. Right. And It's like, it could maybe like enhance a conversation you might have with such a person.
I learned that when you go to a sushi restaurant and somebody orders a miso soup, that you shouldn't also order the miso soup because then they'll be mad at you because on Wednesdays we wear pink.
Yes. I mean, you joke, but at the same time, like you may learn about sushi menu items that you didn't know existed. I don't know. Like
that's
you could
true,
go to next time you go to a sushi restaurant, you're like, I could try the okonomiyaki this time.
Which I don't even know if that's a card in Sushi Go, but okay.
Fuck.
So I've been reading Cardboard Ghosts by Amabel Holland. And
okay.
Amabel also recently released a YouTube video that kind of acts as like an appendix of sorts to the book. A piece of media that works in conjunction with the book. And one of the things that Amabel posits in both is that board games can be artifacts that represent concepts or things in reality that allow you to interact or digest them in ways different from the original material. A good example is like war games where you're able to understand the historical significance of certain things or even just what exactly happened in a particular portion of a war or a particular battle via the mechanisms that represent it. And I'm not even talking about like simulationists, like this isn't like this plays out this way because of the mechanisms being built around the actual thing. It's almost like a larger picture, like how certain things impact other things. A good example is a game like Meltwater, where it's playing around with this idea of like the value of a human being's life in terms of how much capital gain you get from it and things like that. These systems are interesting to play around with, not because they're like simulations or realistic even, but because they have certain immersion properties that make you question yourself and kind of the way the world works, as well as like just general concepts about morality. I think in that way, specifically board games can provide something that is different from anything out there. When you play a board game, you have to understand how it works. I mean, that's why we read rules. That's why we teach rules. When you play a video game, some of that is run by the actual software that you're running. I would say most of it. And obviously, asterisks next to like turn-based games and things like that. But like, you fundamentally need to understand the mechanisms within a board game to be able to interface with it in a, I would say, productive way. And so the understanding of the mechanisms in and of itself is a way of evaluating or critiquing systems that exist in our world. I think that's very valuable. And I think that's something that board games almost exclusively are best at.
I was just going to say, this makes me think of Daybreak in particular, New Game Alert. That one features a lot of real world solutions to climate change. And you can really like kind of learn a lot, not only just about how those solutions work just by reading the card or even understanding what it does mechanically. But you can even sort of understand like what the system of a clean energy might need. Like from my perspective, as far as I can tell, what nations need to do in order to combat climate change is sort of overinvest in their energy grid right now so that it produces more than they need, and then basically shut down all of the dirty energy and other forms of pollution, seemingly.
It's interesting that you mentioned Daybreak, because Amabel does talk about Daybreak quite a bit in her Metaphors video, and she has like mixed feelings about it.
I saw that, and I think I agree with her largely. It's just like the players take on the role of entire nations, basically superpowers in the world. I mean, in the case of the player who's playing the majority world, you're playing like everything that isn't the EU, China, and the US, which is kind of an insane sort of level of cooperation that we do not in the real world have. And so there's like this idea that like, we, quote unquote, as individual people could change the world. But it's like, what are we playing as? We're playing as like entire nations, entire superpowers, or sometimes multiple nations working together.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, we're not even anywhere close to having global cooperation at that scale. So it kind of like, it sort of falls apart when you break it down. And I think that was her point. I think she was largely right. It's kind of frustrating.
Well, yeah. Well, it's also like
side effect.
It's also like there are implications about what happens in Daybreak that make it sadder than what it looks like. Because at first it's like, look, if we all work together, then we could get to a place where we could stop climate change. And it's actually like there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's like a lot of these things could be done, but the flip side to that she mentions is, but we choose not to do it. Like we could fix these things relatively easily, but because of the way that the world is set up, these things that are on these cards are not happening. And that was kind of her other side of the coin, because a lot of reviews or critiques of Daybreak have been generally positive. Like, look at, like, this is like an optimistic look at how we can change the world. Her take is like, well, we relies very heavily on these key players that are either governments or capitalists, and they're not going to do it. And so, like, this is all nice and great, but like at the end of the day, it only highlights the problems that we're facing right now. We need a version of Daybreak that instead of it being climate change, it's about like government reform. I guess.
Yeah, maybe.
Block by Block is kind of like that. I still haven't played that game, but.
Or like someone needs to basically merge hegemony with Daybreak so that like the working class can basically pull down the government that is, forwarding, lobbied. You know what I mean? Like if we had like a game that was fully asymmetric, where it was like this oil and gas lobby, and then on the other side of the table was like, just the working class, right? Something like that as a board game would be incredible. And it could actually be instructive for like there's sort of the real world work that needs to happen, and that is absent in Daybreak.
To tie what we're saying back to the topic, I think this is a perfect example, the conversation that we're having right now, of the benefits that we can get from engaging with board games. These types of conversations, which I feel like most people have with regards to the games that they play, they create a certain like space for thought that I don't think you get from other media, or you get differently from other media. And so that in and of itself is really interesting and valuable.
Right. It can be the starting point for these types of conversations, what you're saying.
Yeah.
Even if the game itself does not execute flawlessly, it's at least getting the topic.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like that aspect. And, you said you were reading a book. Well, I've been reading a book, as it turns out, crazy enough. And I've literally picked this up because I wanted to elevate this podcast a little bit. I feel like most of the time we're just talking out of our ass. Mm-hmm. So I went to the experts and I read a book by Jane McGonigal. It's called Reality is Broken: Why Games Make Us Better and How They Can Change the World. Now, this book is very focused on video games, but I think a lot of the ideas can be applied to pretty much all games. And the general ideas are that games are a force that is pulling people into them, whether we like it or not. And especially in video games, it's just like there is a sort of an exodus of people engaging in the quote unquote real world because they're instead playing online multiplayer games. So like, just think about how many people are spending billions, eons of hours in World of Warcraft, for example, right? It's a virtual reality that they have effectively lived in some cases, for like a significant portion of human life. And what that means is that there's like a vacancy in the real world. And what I think Jane McGonigal largely argues it for is that this isn't necessarily a bad thing, as some people kind of like to make it out to be. It's more illustrative of the fact that video games are better in a certain sense than the real world. And that's why the book is what it's called, Reality is Broken. It's like reality doesn't offer people the same feedback loop, the same mechanisms, the same reward systems for doing work that video games do. Because you play World of Warcraft, it's not like, it's literally just a job, and I think most WoW players can even agree. Like it's just a part-time
The WoW
job.
players right now are like, yeah.
Right. No, undoubtedly. EVE Online is like another classic example of this. Probably even those gacha games, like I can't remember what they're called. All of a sudden, Genshin Impact. All of these are just like a large like working investment, but there's reward structures built into it that keep people coming back over and over. You could talk about like a lot of it's like gambling and there's like problems, and definitely people are losing money that they can't afford to lose on some of these things. And in that sense, it's a problem. But it points more to like the jobs that we sort of have for people, or we create that make available for people in the real world, are not interesting because there's no like sort of arbitrary difficulties. There's nothing sort of making it a challenge that actually keeps people engaged and want to come back. And I'm learning to try and apply some of this even now in my own life to like getting my kids to do the chores. And I've found some success actually with gamifying real life and being like, yo, it's not, do you want to sweep the floors? It's, do you want to varnish the royal palace and earn experience points and gold, right? And then I try and increase that a little bit with a bit of variable player reward. So it's not always the same amount of gold. It's like a D6 times 5 amount of gold or something.
I'm really not surprised that gamification has taken off and is kind of like a buzzword, because it's such a core aspect of what people enjoy doing. Like even things that we don't typically consider to be games just kind of feel natural and are things that we engage with pretty frequently. Sports, for example, or just even other hobbies that are not as closely associated oftentimes end up having an aspect of play to them. It's just something that's like human nature. This is less about the benefits of it, but I think it's more like just saying like, this is something that is integral to the way we think. We should lean into it.
Well, I guess what I'm saying in a sense, and to tie it back around, is like, in order to get more out of games, you almost want to get games into your real life in a sense, right? Like how can you apply what you're experiencing in the game world into your real life?
That's why when I'm driving on the freeway, I'm always like, oh, I could get so many more points if I hit that car. And then if I cut in front of that car, that's like 200 points right there,
I mean, that's why when I'm driving, I'm always wondering, like, how can I drift this corner, Mario Kart style?
Yeah, you get the red flames going. We're joking, by the way. We're both very safe drivers.
Buckle up. Another point that I wanted to make that comes out of Reality is Broken is kind of this idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic rewards. So she talks about this. Basically, like, we have studied this a lot, we as a society, and have found that the things that make you happy are not what you have. What you have are like extrinsic rewards, right? Like a good job, high paying jobs, say, or a house, a car, the hot girlfriend, the hot boyfriend, both, whatever it is, right? Like those are all like external things to you. Those are extrinsic things. Now, in a lot of cases, like some of those are maybe a baseline, but beyond a certain point, they don't actually make you any happier. But intrinsic rewards, things that engage you, things that make you feel like you're a part of something bigger than your station in life, the things that make you feel like you're participating in your community, creating like a sort of a legacy, those are the things that I think make people the happiest, as we found time and again in various studies and such, right? And so games, they trigger that part of your brain. And especially board games, the community is kind of baked in. You know, you're like experiencing something with other people. And when you play something like Daybreak, I think the reason I like it so much is that it allows me to feel like I'm part of a future where we solved climate change, right?
Or at least you engaged with it in a certain sense, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it creates that intrinsic happiness. And I think that the neurological factors like persist past the game.
Now, I will say something though, Tom.
Okay.
One thing that I do think is a quality of video games, and where Jane, I think, is coming from, is this idea that you are usually with video games engaging with the game itself. If we go back to your example, I think you and I would both agree that like owning a fancy car is probably extrinsic. But I would argue that if you're passionate about cars and it's not the owning that matters, it's more like you tinkering with that car, or, you know, learning all about it, or driving it around. Or the
community, the car driving community that you're engaging with.
Or even just driving it all over the place. Like you're really just enjoying the actual drive and things like that. Those are intrinsic. And so, bringing it back to video games and board games, I don't think there's a big culture in video games of like owning games. Nobody gives a shit if you own a game, because games are not super expensive, and also usually, even if you don't get around to buying or to playing all the games that you buy, you're still striving towards them, and there's a general agreement, there's a consensus that you should be playing the games. I don't know that extends to board games, unfortunately. There is a pretty big consumerist culture when it comes to board games, and sometimes a lot of the fun is just buying stuff or getting accessories and things like that. While I agree with you that the play of board games is intrinsic, I would argue that a lot of the culture around board games is still extrinsic.
It's focused on the extrinsic.
Yeah.
I think that's that's an astute observation that, I mean, we made this entire podcast basically because we noticed that trend.
Yeah.
Right? That there is a focus in the culture a little bit too much on the extrinsic properties of the hobby. And so, yeah, I think I agree with you, but it doesn't necessarily defeat the point. It's like, in what you said about cars is just as well, right? Like you want to highlight or bring to light the intrinsic properties, right? Like, are you into board gaming because you want to have the swaggiest collection of 800 million games? Or are you playing board games because when you have a really solid session of brass, you get to the end of it and you go like, wow, like, you know, I feel like I accomplished something, even if you didn't win.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the big point too. It's like, it's almost like it's more about winning. It's like even the game is over, and that is sad because when you were playing the game, you were engaged, right?
Yeah.
You were all neurons firing type stuff.
Yeah. You and I are typically seeking that. For us, it's like, of course, you know, this is definitely a benefit I get. I do, unfortunately, feel like folks, it's not as much I got to get all this swag and I'm going to feel good when I have all this swag. I don't think that's the feeling. I think it's more like, this thing looks really cool. I feel compelled to purchase it, even though I know I shouldn't, but it's still giving me that that hit to have it.
Me when the One Ring is being held in front of me.
Yeah, there is still that intent to play it, but a lot of the motivation comes from purchasing it.
You seem very concerned that somehow people are going to come away from this thinking like, I should back more Kickstarters. I don't know.
No. It's not that concern.
Yeah.
It's almost like that is a difference between video games and board games. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe that's an effect that occurs more frequently with video games than I am aware of, just because I'm not as ingrained in that culture.
I think there's a bit of it in video gaming, infamously with Steam sales and Steam library bloat, where like people are they're buying digital copies of games. I mean, we're just at a point in video game and in movie culture both where like having a shitload of Blu-rays and box sets of things on your shelves is just like not the vibe anymore. I'd almost argue we should go back to that if for no other reason than to like just not waste so much money on the sale of digital games where it's like, oh, I heard of that, I should buy it because it's like 80% off right now, and then you just have something sitting in this digital collection that you are never going to play.
Right. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I think it might apply to both.
Yeah. At the end of the day, consumerism is perhaps a broad trend of a problem that we have as maybe both a nation and a world society. So
let me revise my statement. I think instead of saying like board games and video games are different, I think the bigger statement is just, I think it's a little too optimistic to say that video games produce intrinsic happiness. I think they produce both, and same goes for board games. While I'm willing to agree that the intrinsic rewards are there, I don't want to put games on a pedestal as far as like, oh, like look at all these folks with their garbo shopping sprees and stuff. Like we do a hobby that gives us true happiness. Like I think a lot of hobbies can be victim to the former. And I also think that a lot of hobbies can have the intrinsic rewards too.
Gotcha. I think I hear what you're saying. And I think the point of her writing is to basically make out that like kind of what you're getting at, which is like, yes, there's extrinsic value to be had in pretty much any hobby, and video games and board games aren't an exception. But the intrinsic rewards that we seek in life in general can be more readily accessible through video games, and maybe a lesser extent or to a similar extent board games.
I know I'm flip-flopping, but it's like it's good. This is discourse. You're convincing me, or I guess Jane is convincing me. I think it's easier to get there with board games and video games. I will concede that. I agree with that. So
right. It's kind of like the payoffs for like the investment you might do in your lawn care or something are not just like as immediate as like noteworthy or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking of it like a yes or no, whether it has intrinsic happiness or not, when really it's like how easily you can get there. And I agree that like, even if you go back to the car example, just because there are people who are passionate about their fancy car, it's not necessarily as common, I would say, as people who just buy a car because of its status symbol or because they really wanted that car even, which like I would say the latter is not even necessarily a negative. But with board games, you're a lot more likely to engage with the actual material or desire to purchase it exclusively for that engagement versus because of a desire to own it. I think it's easier to get there to the intrinsic rewards with all forms of games.
What's all this got to do with the point, I guess? What are we trying to really get at here? Basically, playing board games makes you happy, and that's a good enough reason to do it.
That's a good argument.
Really.
I got one that's very different from what we've talked about so far.
Okay.
That's board games improving physical or mental skills. While I don't think that board games are very good at improving math, doing things that stimulate your brain creatively, I mean, this was mostly in the context of Sudokus and crosswords. It's not going to stop Alzheimer's or dementia, first of all. Like, there were studies done around this, and basically they said that there was no correlation between the prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia. I think that's more of a myth, the whole like use it or lose it thing. So I just want to put that out there before somebody goes, actually. However, there was a study published for the International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry where folks in 2019 determined that doing regular cognitive puzzles when you were aged 50 and up did increase your core measures, or at least the core measures that were determined in this particular test for cognitive function by like a significant value across the board. So while it's not going to stop you from getting Alzheimer's or prevent you from getting Alzheimer's, exercising mental activity increases your cognitive function overall. And it's one of those things that you kind of have to like continuously do. So what am I trying to say with all of this? Board games, I would argue, are pretty effective at doing that. I mean, these tests were all done with these kinds of puzzles that I would equate to some of the experiences that you get from board gaming, help to stimulate your brain on a day-to-day. Like, you're physically changing the composition of your brain to a point where you are able to do more with your brain overall. Now, on the dexterity side, I was listening to an episode of So Very Wrong About Games, and Michael Walker, one of the hosts, he actually had a stroke. It was very serious, but fortunately came out of it relatively unscathed. He used dexterity games to kind of help with his physical therapy. On top of that, he introduced a lot of these games to the hospital that he was in, and they ended up either getting their own copies or him gifting them because they were so effective and successful with the other folks that were at the hospital. It turns out that dexterity games are a way of gamifying a lot of these activities that they were trying to get folks to get into the habit of doing regularly. And it's just a lot more interesting to do something that's competitive or just that has a certain aspect of play to it than to do a certain motion over and over. I think it depends on the game, obviously. Like, you're not going to want to do something that goes outside of whatever you're capable of doing at a certain point, because otherwise it would just be frustrating. But if you can find a game that works well for you and you're somebody that has or is going through physical therapy for something, this could be a really good opportunity to gamify, or I guess help train that aspect of your physical nature. The same way as like training the mental part.
I never thought about like dexterity games in particular being something that could help, I guess, people recovering from injury, but it makes a lot of sense. A lot of the games are like fine motor skill type stuff.
Yeah. I want to do one more highlight. I'm not going to speak too much to it because I think it was just one study, but this has to do with like neurodivergence and board gaming.
Okay.
There's a CogSci study out of the University of Plymouth that had to do with exploring the role of board games in the lives of autistic people. I'll link it, but basically they explored the benefits as well as the way that folks that are on the autism spectrum engage with board games, how those are the same and how they differ from neurotypical folks. They looked at a lot of different games, which is really fascinating. I was like, okay, these researchers know what they're doing, because it's not just crosswords, it's not just Monopoly like you sometimes see in some stuff. They evaluated like Spirit Island, which is wild.
Whoa.
But then they also looked into like social games, like Werewolf and things like that. So they categorize these different types of games and how folks that are on the autism spectrum engage with them, the benefits and the cons. There's a lot in there, so I'm not going to go into too much of it, but they had some recommendations as far as how you can gamify therapy and therapeutic play, which were really interesting. They also talked about the benefits of board gaming to create commonalities across folks that are neurotypical and neurodivergent, that it's like a space that has structure to it. I think there's a common misconception about how folks on the autism spectrum engage with rules. I think the stereotype is typically like that folks that are on the autism spectrum, they need rules. I think that's kind of a misnomer. There's all kinds of ways that people operate or interface with rules. However, the nice thing with rules is that they create a baseline for all different types of folks to engage with each other. So it's less that the rules are what are sought out. It's more that the rules create a baseline and they can reduce a lot of that social anxiety.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just a really interesting study. I'll link it up.
Well, I think we've yapped more than long enough this week, Kenny. But that's going to do it for this week, guys. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you so much for continuing to tune in. And if you're new here, welcome. We love to have you, love to keep you. And hopefully we've convinced you to stick around. Thank you to Michael, Tyler, Devin, and Josh of the Boise Rainbows for your awesome segue music that we use for the 100 games. And thank you to Bonehouse for letting us use your song Rot as our opening theme. We're going to be at Tree Fort next Friday. So not the week that this episode is airing, but the week after. That's March 28th. And it's 3 o'clock until about 3:45. And that's at the Boise Contemporary Theater. So 3 o'clock Mountain Time, the Boise Contemporary Theater, right here in Idaho. Come check us out if you don't have work, because it's the middle of the day on Friday. But we'll be there, and we'll be giving away some of our games a little bit as well. Some copies of stuff you might want to get your hands on. Might not. It should be a fun time.
No, I mean, they're good games. Don't sell the short.
No, we'll have some good games to give away.
If you're loving the cast, share it with a friend or on Reddit or on BGG. It's the best thing you can do to help us grow. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, send us an email at shelfstablecast@gmail.com. All of this and more available in the show notes. All right, what's our topic?
Next week, Kenny, we already touched on it a little bit this episode, but we're going to explore it even more. We're going to talk about games that should get reprinted.
Yeah, what the heck, Tigris and Euphrates? Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening.